to buying a new computer. So on the one hand, you're getting a new computer. Great. Getting rid of your old clunker. Everything's going to work faster. On the other hand, though, new computers for a very long time always came with that freaking terrible pre-installed virus software. McAfee, virus scan, right? It was always installed in some 30-day free trial, like they were doing you a favor and you were going to want to pay for it thereafter. It was super annoying. It would update all the time without giving you any option to opt out. It made your computer run really slow. It stopped you from being able to do things you wanted to do. It didn't actually prevent me from getting viruses that I still got while it was on my computers that I didn't want it on. There was no way to get away from it. If you wanted to say, no, don't do this to me, I reject the 30-day free trial, you kind of were not allowed. It was just a terrible thing. And some companies will still put that mess onto their new computers, but I think mostly they have grown out of it because people hate it. It's just terrible software. It is pointless. It does not work. The guy who started that business is named John McAfee. He did invent the world's first commercial antivirus software. And whether or not it was that annoying and pointless when he first invented it, or whether it just slowly became that annoying and pointless over time, regardless, the reason it is named McAfee is because it's named after this guy, John McAfee. He sold the company and his name on that software for something like $100 million in 2004. And thereafter, he basically became a full-time gonzo, playboy, almost con man-ish media figure. He cultivated this very media-friendly idea of being an outlaw, eccentric zillionaire. In the mid-2000s, for example, John McAfee got lots of attention from the outdoor adventure extreme sports world for something that he called his sky gypsies. Aero trekking, which is basically riding hang gliders with fast motors attached. It's very dangerous. It's John McAfee. He's an eccentric zillionaire. John McAfee had big real estate holdings all over the country, in Colorado and Arizona, Texas. He had a big ranch in New Mexico, a big swath of property in Hawaii. He apparently sold all of it or most of it in 2007 or 2008, and he then moved to Belize. All the while doing lots of eccentric zillionaire interviews, trying to cultivate this image as a fascinating outlaw character. Mr. McAfee bragged to reporters about his epic history of drug use. Cocaine by the ton, Quaaludes, LSD, a bottle of scotch a night, something called DMT. I don't know what that is. The drug bragging produced lines like this in a 2012 Wired magazine profile of him. Quote, he would drop acid in the morning and then go to work. One morning, he decided to experiment with another psychedelic called DMT. He did a line, felt nothing, and decided to snort a whole bag of the orangish powder. Within an hour, my mind was shattered, McAfee says. People asked him questions, but he didn't understand what they were saying. He ended up behind a garbage can in downtown St. Louis, hearing voices and desperately hoping that nobody would look at him. He never went back to work. Part of him believes he's still on that trip, that everything since has been one giant hallucination, and that one day he will snap out of it and find himself back on his couch in St. Louis, listening to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. It has just been one giant drug trip, you guys! I swear this ends up back in Washington. Hold on. Okay, so John McAfee would tell the drug stories and all the self-aggrandizing, eccentric zillionaire stuff to any magazine reporter who would follow him around long enough to listen, and there were tons of them. He made himself into an irresistible story, right? He also insisted to the reporters that would follow him around that he didn't use drugs anymore. That part of his life was behind him. Also, he said the reason he had moved to Belize was not because he was running from anything or because he had any self-interested idea down there, but because he was going to invent a whole new approach to antibiotics, which he was working on with a scientist slash waitress slash guitar player who he had met at a local resort. The Fast Company profile of Mr. McAfee that ran in 2010 followed him around for a long time in Belize, trying to figure out his Belize rainforest antibiotic magic business plan. Fast Company decided ultimately that they think he was just in Belize to shelter his money from all the people who wanted to sue him in America. Ultimately, in April of last year, Mr. McAfee's compound in Belize was raided by local authorities, and he was arrested on weapons charges. Him being arrested sparks a new round of media interest, of course, which lets the 66-year-old Mr. McAfee gleefully tell reporters that he was in bed with his 17-year-old girlfriend and stark naked at the time of his arrest. Reporters invited down to his compound report that he seems to be living not just with one 17-year-old girlfriend, but with a collection of 5 girlfriends, all of whom seem to be teenagers. He has Wired magazine shoot portraits of him and some of his various girlfriends and shows off his collection of the whole sort of group of girlfriends he lives with, plus his bodyguards, plus some of the weapons, plus some of his dogs. And the dogs end up being key to what happens next in the John McAfee story. His neighbor in Belize is an American citizen named Greg Fall. Mr. Fall had filed a formal complaint about aggression and noise from Mr. McAfee's 11 dogs, who apparently roamed free. The same week that complaint about the dogs was filed with the town, John McAfee told an American reporter that somebody had poisoned his dogs. Also, that same week, the neighbor who filed the complaint against him was found dead. Found shot dead. He'd been shot once through the back of the head, and a casing from a 9mm handgun was reportedly found nearby. In December, police in Belize announced that John McAfee was a person of interest in that shooting. They wanted to question him. John McAfee took off, blogging all the way about how he was fleeing the country. So there's not only the record of his blog posts about it and his selfie photos of him on the run, there's also footage, there's video footage about what was going on, about what life was like for him while he was fleeing that murder inquiry in Belize. And the reason that footage exists is because he had reporters from Vice magazine with him while he was fleeing from justice. Because why not? And so because of that, we know, for example, which of his teenage girlfriends he chose to bring with him on his flight from justice. We also know that he did things like pretending to be a spokesman for himself, calling reporters and lying about what country this John McAfee character was in and whether or not he had been arrested.
Mr. McAfee has been arrested just across the border of Belize in the country of Mexico. Write that down.
That was him speaking about himself in the third person, and that was a lie. But he likes lying. He's always said he likes lying. He thinks of himself as a trickster. It's part of the eccentric charm. So he lies, even when he's fleeing law enforcement in a murder inquiry. Ultimately, Mr. McAfee did get arrested in Guatemala. And after a brief effort to try to get asylum somewhere, he got deported to his native country, which is the United States. And he still has not been formally charged in conjunction with that murder of a U.S. citizen in Belize. And because he hasn't been charged, he therefore is free to do more talking to the press.
So is McAfee a successful entrepreneur who went mad while living in the jungle and surrounded himself by guns and became paranoid and killed his neighbor? Or is he the potential savior of America? Or did he just act out the greatest mind of all times?
That's from a BBC profile, which ran earlier this year. The BBC sent somebody to John McAfee's house in Portland, Oregon, to talk to him about where he is and what he's been doing since the murder and everything. John McAfee, however, had other things that he wanted to talk to the BBC about.
Time and time again, I tried to ask him what happened, but